Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I'm Ashley Willingham, a sinner saved by grace, and an author of clean Christian fantasy romance books filled with adult characters, action, adventure, on-page prayer, and God's truths. You're listening to the free serialized audiobook for Ink and Ivy, my cozy Christian fantasy romance, Book One in the Gracehaven series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless and enjoy.
Chapter 33. The next day, the morning sun poured through the front windows of the Honeybloom bake shop and sliced across the spotless glass of the display cases in blinding beams, piercing Ivy's sleep-deprived eyes. She blinked hard against the gritty burn, forcing her heavy limbs to keep moving. That was all she could do today, just keep moving. The bell above the shop's door chimed again, a bright trill that struck directly against her temple like a tiny hammer. The bake shop was already overflowing, but that certainly didn't stop the family of Meadowfay now coming through the door from trying to squeeze their way in. With so many of last night's partygoers from neighbouring Lindenvale and Honeygrove having taken overnight lodgings at Ashdown Park or the Wisteria Inn, the usually quiet streets of Gracehaven were teeming with weekend visitors, and every single one of them, it seemed, had descended upon Marigold's shop for their morning meal. "I'll grab more stools from the back," Mary announced, already disappearing through the swinging door into the kitchen in a blur of russet and gold. Ivy winced. By all accounts, it should have been a perfect Saturday morning. The storm had passed. The sun was out. The air within the bakery was thick and warm, saturated with the comforting scents of melting butter, toasted cinnamon, and blooming yeast. A symphony of lively chatter filled the space. Mugs clattered against tables, chairs scraped against the floor. Amidst it all, a child laughed. But it was all too loud, too bright, too much. An aching void yawned within her chest, scraped raw by an agonizing night spent staring at the shadows on her ceiling, listening to the rain, and wondering what she had done to earn such a resounding rejection from Fern, the only man she had ever known who seemed to understand her. The man who had promised her so much and yet hadn't even bothered to show his face. "I promise I shall make my every intention most plain." Her chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Her thoughts swirled until it was hard to think. Unbidden, the Duke's face flashed through her already muddled mind, forcing her to relive that awful, pained look in his eyes right before the maze had swallowed him whole. Goodbye. No doubt he would be leaving Gracehaven soon and returning to Veritas with little Elodie, the Montclairs, and the Lord Regent. The corner shop would become vacant again. She could purchase it at last and turn it into her dream apothecary. Her dream home, a place just for her where she wouldn't be a bother to anyone. She had thought such an idea would have brought her comfort. Instead, it brought her nothing.
"Miss Ivy."
A familiar voice called. Mr. Barnaby Abernathy, the distinguished fable badger who owned the magical creature sanctuary, perched atop a stool there at the front counter. When she glanced his way, he sheepishly waved his empty coffee mug at her. Her polite smile snapped back into place. "We'll be right with you," she called out to the family of Meadowfay before plucking up the carafe of coffee and hurrying forward to refill Mr. Abernathy's mug. "Here you are," she murmured, striving to keep her tone bright, happy, a perfect mimicry of Marigold's never-failing agreeableness. Adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles, Mr. Abernathy gave a contented, rumbling hum.
"Much obliged, Miss Ivy. Much obliged."
Dabbing the crumbs from his striped snout, he eagerly returned his attention to his half-eaten breakfast. A massive, golden-brown turnover, its flaky butter-rich crust oozing with a warm strawberry compote beneath its generous melting dollop of sweet clotted cream.
"After the bake shop closes up for the day, you ought to stop by the sanctuary for a visit. We have a new clutch of griffin hatchlings we're rehabilitating. I know how fond you were of the last that passed through."
For a moment, Ivy's smile tried to soften into something more genuine, fleeting though it was. Though griffins were proud and noble creatures, their hatchlings were quite endearing, all soft fur and downy feathers, eager to play. Elodie would adore them. Elodie. Another wave of pain spiked through her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I will try to make time," she quietly promised, the words ringing hollow despite all her false cheer. "But not tonight. Perhaps next week?" Tonight she would have to brave Crochet Club and hope Daphne didn't want to gossip about the party all evening.
Oh, of course, of course.
Mr. Abernathy bobbed his head before plucking up his fork to indulge in another generous bite of his breakfast.
You're welcome to stop by any time, Miss Ivy,
he mumbled, speaking around a mouthful of strawberry turnover and cream. The kitchen door swung back open, and Marigold emerged again, trying to precariously balance 5 stacked stools within her arms like a madwoman. Ivy immediately abandoned her task of refilling coffee mugs at the counter and hurried toward her friend to help. But Bastien, wedged at a corner table with Felix, Daphne and 3 of his friends from Honeygrove, was already on his feet and carefully weaving through the crowd toward them.
Hold on there, ladies. Let me get those for you.
"Thank you, Bastien," Marigold called back, carefully setting down her tower of stools behind the counter so the dragon shifter could commandeer them. Sagging slightly against the display case, she wiped the back of her hand across her lightly perspiring brow. But her best friend only gave herself a single second to rest before she forced herself upright and turned a sunshine-filled smile back upon Ivy. "Do you mind taking the carafe through the room and refilling coffee there?" Marigold asked. "I can stay back here and get these newcomers settled." The mere prospect of squeezing through that suffocating mass of people sounded like a particularly diabolical brand of torture. But Ivy offered a tight smile and a nod of assent all the same before she set out to do just that. She navigated the chaotic labyrinth of the bake shop on pure mechanical instinct, weaving around haphazardly placed chairs and dodging gesturing hands as she topped off steaming mugs and murmured polite, empty pleasantries all the while. But finally, she broke through the worst of the crush to reach the corner table where Daphne and Felix sat alongside Bastien's 3 friends from Honeygrove, a half-wood elf with pointed ears peeking through his dark hair and a well-groomed beard, a wolf shifter who flashed an easy smile at her approach, and a sun-fae with glossy wings carefully tucked between him and the back of his chair. Ivy couldn't recall a single one of their names, though she knew Bastien had introduced them to her before. She offered the table her very best attempt at a smile, and hoped no one would think her rude for not addressing them by name. Daphne returned the expression with a deeply apologetic grimace, holding out her empty mug. "Do you 2 need help? Shall I come behind the counter too? I have a bit more time before my shift at the library starts." Felix leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He was already dressed in his crisp, brass-buttoned postmaster uniform, ready to report for duty the moment he left the bake shop.
Yes. Do let us know if you need anything.
Ivy's gaze snagged on his leather satchel left draped over the back of his chair. The question she so desperately wished to ask clawed at her throat. Was there any news from Fern? That was all she needed. Just one letter. A single line from her secret admirer to explain why he had never shown himself at the party last night, leaving her to dance with Mr. Vael and to face the scrutiny of the Lord Regent and the Montclairs entirely alone. But the question withered on her tongue. She already knew there was no letter. If there had been a missive from Fern, Felix would have pressed it into her hands the very second he walked through the bakery doors. Bitter disappointment settled in her stomach like a stone. Perhaps he had changed his mind about her. Perhaps she had done something wrong. "We're perfectly fine," she insisted, pouring a fresh stream of dark coffee into Daphne's mug. "I don't mind the work. I want to keep busy today." Daphne's tufted ears drooped slightly at such words. Sparing a cautious glance toward the Honeygrove visitors currently engaged in their own quiet conversation, the fawn leaned closer and lowered her voice. "There has still been no word from Fern, then?" Ivy silently shook her head. Daphne sighed, her eyebrows knitting together. How strange. I had been so very certain he was going to propose. Felix abruptly cleared his throat. Busying himself with pulling free his pocket watch, he checked the time with a frown. In the next moment, the man rose to his feet before lifting Daphne's hand to brush a lingering kiss against her knuckles.
I must be going, darling, but I will stop by the library on my lunch break to see you.
Daphne's attention instantly riveted upon her fiancé, pure adoration shining in her gaze. Of course. Do have a wonderful day at work. Ivy idly fidgeted, shifting her weight from foot to foot, while she waited for Felix to navigate his way through the bustling crowd and out the front door. There was something else she desperately needed to say to Daphne. Something she had been avoiding bringing up, or even thinking about, ever since Bastien had escorted her home early last night. Dropping her voice to a quiet, shameful whisper, she finally tried to confess. Daphne, about last night. The party. The hedge maze. She trailed off with a wince, waiting for disappointment to flash across the other woman's features. She did so adore that maze. But Daphne simply raised her eyebrows, as if the sudden shift in conversation had caught her quite off guard. What about it? She asked, indulging in a careful sip of her coffee. Chapter 34. Ivy's stomach sank further. Daphne didn't know. She must not have seen what she had done to it, rearranging the U. Right before Caelen Vael blasted a hole right through it. Drawing in a deep breath, she braced herself and expelled on a quiet rush of sound. I'm afraid I destroyed it last night. I'm so incredibly sorry. I can stop by the estate later today and see if I can try to fix it. Or perhaps I can pay for it to be repaired. The mere thought of what such a thing might cost sent her stomach roiling in protest. But if she could ruin the hedges in her blind panic, she could most certainly pay to set them right. And yet, Daphne didn't react at all to the news that her family's hedge maze had been destroyed. She didn't balk. She didn't even blink. She simply set her coffee mug back down and waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that. Do not worry about it. It's already been taken care of. Ivy's brow furrowed at that. No, absolutely not. She wasn't about to stand there and let the Halloways brush over a mistake she had made. She had destroyed the maze. She would see it fixed. Before she could offer a single word in protest, however, Daphne glanced around the crowded table and leaned in close again. Mr. Vael paid for it all last night, you see, her friend whispered, but he made me promise not to tell. Ivy blinked, her thoughts sluggishly churning, trying to make sense of this news. He had already paid for it. Even though it had been her fault, even though she had been the one to lead him into the maze, even though she had been the one to rearrange the hedges and block his path. But why? Belatedly, her mind snagged on Daphne's latter words. She frowned. If he made you promise not to tell, then why are you telling me? Daphne sat back up with a good-natured huff, plucking up her coffee again. Well, you looked so wretched about it all. I just didn't want you to worry. Ivy delivered a flat, thoroughly unimpressed look to the fawn. Daphne offered an unrepentant smile in return. Truly, do not worry about last night at all. It was... She let loose a dreamy sigh. Absolutely wonderful. Lord Montclair was most agreeable and seemed determined to dance with every lady in the room who had not yet been asked to dance. And after Mr. Vael returned, and he did ask me to only call him Mr. Vael, never His Grace, he, the Lord Regent, and Father had some manner of discussion amongst themselves that left Father immensely excited, though he wouldn't tell me what it was all about. Ivy! Marigold called, her friend's voice winging over the boisterous hum of the crowd. She twitched, rocking onto her back foot as she prepared to excuse herself. But Daphne simply kept going, chattering away with, apparently Father knew all along that Mr. Vael was the Duke of Guildenspire, but he and Mamma promised not to breathe a word. Oh, but you wouldn't believe the manners of that Lady Lysandra. She spent the whole evening demanding Felix dance with her. My Felix. And he was too polite to refuse her. After I endeavoured to cling to his arm for the rest of the night, she turned her attentions back to Mr. Vael, of course. And they danced 3 sets together. Pardon me, but I must go, Ivy blurted out, plunging back into the fray before Daphne could protest. Offering a tight smile to Bastien in passing, she finally broke free of the crush and slipped back behind the safety of the front counter. The family of Meadowfay had successfully been squeezed in at the far end of the display cases, and were now sharing one of Marigold's gooey caramel pecan cinnamon rolls. All the coffee mugs were filled. Everyone seemed content. The bell hadn't chimed in some time. Perhaps the worst of the Saturday morning rush was over. Marigold greeted her with a smile as her gossamer wings gave a weak little flutter. The only sign of exhaustion her best friend was surely willing to show. "How is everything out there?" "Perfectly fine," Ivy replied, setting down the now empty copper carafe. "Sorry it took me so long. I wanted to talk to Daphne about the hedge maze." Marigold offered a sympathetic wince. "But it's all fine, I suppose," Ivy hastily tacked on. "They're already setting about to getting it fixed." She wanted to tell Mary the rest of it, that Mr. Vael had been the one to take care of it all. But if he wanted his involvement to remain a secret it would be. The Sun Fae brightened at once. "Oh, good. Now then, all we have left to do is gather up Mr. Croft's weekly order before he arrives." A quiet clatter sounded to Ivy's left. Mr. Abernathy set down his fork, his striped snout crinkling.
"I do so hate to eavesdrop, Miss Ivy. Miss Marigold?"
The Fable Badger interjected, his voice pitched apologetically low.
"But I'm afraid Mr. Croft won't be by today. He's already gone."
Marigold stiffened, a rare flash of worry pinching her features. "Gone, Mr. Abernathy?" Ivy's brow furrowed. "Gone where?" Mr. Abernathy quickly explained.
"I'm afraid he had to make an emergency trip on behalf of the sanctuary yesterday. Yes, we had some word that an injured drake is making quite a mess of things up north in the mountains."
The Fable Badger let out a short, nervous laugh.
"Mr. Croft being the only one of my volunteers strong enough to handle a drake, naturally I begged him to go. I am sure if there had been time, he would have sent word that there would be no need to pack his order this week, Miss Marigold. But he had to leave quite in a rush, I'm afraid."
Mr. Abernathy's words sank in slowly. "Mr. Croft, on an emergency trip. Yesterday, no time to send word. Time ground to an agonizing crawl." The bake shop's chaotic din abruptly muffled into a distant underwater hum. The blood drained completely from her face. No. Surely it couldn't be. "When did he leave yesterday, Mr. Abernathy?" Marigold asked, her voice little more than a whisper. Clearly her best friend was thinking exactly what she was thinking. The Fable Badger stroked his whiskers.
"Oh, in the evening, I suppose. Just at sunset."
Just at sunset. Exactly the time Daphne and Felix's engagement party had begun. Like a woman now moving through a nightmare, she slowly turned her head to try to catch Mary's eye. But Marigold was no longer looking at her. She was no longer looking at anything. The Sun Fae released a sharp, fractured breath, a tremulous smile painting itself across her lips. "Do excuse me." She exhaled before hurriedly disappearing through the swinging door back into the kitchen. Ivy remained right where she was, frozen behind the counter. Beneath her feet, the floor seemed to dangerously tilt until she staggered forward and caught the counter's edge. Could it be? Had Mr. Croft truly been Fern this entire time? Life continued on around her. Conversation and laughter, the sound of the bake shop's bell tinkling as another group of customers filtered out into the sunshine. Mr. Abernathy must have left at some point. When next she blinked, it was no longer the Fable Badger perched on the stool before her, but Daphne leaning over the counter, a worried expression etched into her features. "Ivy?" she asked, her voice cast low. "Ivy, what's wrong?" Through trembling lips, Ivy tried to explain what Mr. Abernathy had just revealed to both her and Marigold. And yet, all she could manage was, "Mr. Croft left abruptly last night, just at sunset." But clearly that was all she needed to say for Daphne to instantly understand. The fawn's tufted ears immediately flattened against her curls, her gaze darting toward the kitchen door. Lowering her voice, she hurriedly whispered, "You don't think?" Over Daphne's shoulder, a sudden flash of pristine white and deep midnight black caught the brilliant morning sunlight spilling through the front windows. Outside, the noble party from Veritas, absent the Lord Regent, moved down the bustling cobbled street. Lord Montclair, his silver hair gleaming like a freshly minted coin, strolled along the storefronts with little Elodie's small gloved hand securely clasped in his own. And right behind them walked Mr. Vael. But he was not alone. Lady Lysandra pressed intimately close to his side, her hand tucked firmly into the crook of his arm. Leaning in, the elegant elven woman tipped her head to murmur something meant only for him. The hollowed-out space within Ivy's chest ripped wider, tearing at the seams. Especially when, through the window, Lord Montclair's silvered gaze briefly cut toward the bake shop and snagged upon her. The elven lord offered a polite, cordial smile in passing. But the Duke kept his gaze locked rigidly forward. His sharp profile remained carved from stone as he continued on, not slowing, not sparing the bake shop, or her, a single fleeting glance. How distant last night now seemed, when she had been the sole object of his attention as he had danced with her. As he had shielded her against the Lord Regent's curiosity. As he had chased her out into the night, into the rain, desperate to speak. And all she had been concerned with was finding Fern. Suddenly, she was once again a woman standing on the very edge of a precipice, gazing down into an abyss. Except this time, there was no chance to retreat. There was no solid ground left to run to. The crumbling stone of the cliff simply gave way beneath her ill-fitting boots, sending her plunging wildly into the cold, dark unknown. Her numb fingers loosened and slipped away from the counter's edge. "I no longer know what to think anymore, Daphne," she whispered, exhaustion clouding her vision at the edges, sending her eyes to burning. "I just don't know." Chapter 35. The remainder of Saturday dissolved into a suffocating blur, wiping down tables, pouring endless cups of coffee, pinning that same empty smile to her lips for every new customer who walked through the Honeybloom's doors, and absolutely trying to not think about Fern. Fern, who had penned her the loveliest letters filled with scripture. Fern, who might truly be Mr. Croft. The very idea made the sugar-scented air within the bakery grow entirely too hot, too thick. Had Daphne been right all along? Once Marigold finally returned to the front counter, her eyes glistening and her smile fragile, Ivy tried to find an opportunity to talk to her, to reassure her that it did not matter if Mr. Croft was Fern or not. She did not care for Mr. Croft. She did not even know Mr. Croft. But try as she might, Mary always found an excuse to remove herself from any such talks before they could even properly begin. And that was how they operated for the rest of the day, a heavy, unnatural silence between them. Her best friend reduced to a mere shadow of her usual vibrant self. By the time the bakery finally closed for the evening, Ivy's cheeks ached from smiling with so much false cheer. Exhaustion clung to her joints, making her long for bed. But at least she and Marigold could now escape into the comfort of their weekly crochet club. Now they could finally speak. With a sigh, Ivy trudged through the kitchen, all the way to the back, where she tossed her apron into the basket of dirty linens resting beneath the counter. Her gaze tracked across the pots and pans, still piled high within the sink, waiting to be cleaned. Her body ached further at the thought of tidying up that mess now, after such a long day. But perhaps the task would seem more manageable once she was full of cookies and tea. "Can we just leave the washing until later?" she called out hopefully over her shoulder, turning to face Marigold, who stood by the butcher block island dominating the space. "For after crochet club?" Arms wrapped tightly around her middle, Mary suddenly claimed, I do not think I will be joining you tonight. I fear I am feeling rather unwell. I'll just stay here and lie down." Ivy's eyebrows knit together. She stepped forward, reaching out. "Oh, Mari, we can both stay in then. I'll make us some peppermint tea." "No!" She flinched away from the uncharacteristic sharpness in Marigold's tone. Her best friend's wings instantly drooped, twitching weakly against her spine. "No, please," she quietly amended, her voice shifting to a strained plea. A watery smile curved the other woman's lips. "I simply need to lie down. Please, go to the wisteria. Send along my regrets to the others. Snatching up a basket from the nearby counter, a basket piled high with the buttery golden shortbread that had been destined for Mr. Croft's weekly order, Marigold marched across the kitchen and shoved the cookies directly into Ivy's arms. "Take these to the ladies," Mari gently insisted as she ushered Ivy back through the swinging door and straight toward the front entrance of the shop. "Tell them I love them. Tell them I'll see them tomorrow at church. Don't worry about the washing. I'll see to it all myself." Ivy frowned, shooting her friend a dubious look. "I thought you said you were going to lie down. Have a lovely time at club." Murray nudged her right out into the night, sending her stumbling onto the darkening cobblestones. The bakery door firmly snapped shut behind her. The lock engaged with a heavy, unyielding thud. And there she stood without her keys. Her heart growing heavier with each step, Ivy started off down the street, moving through the warm spring evening like a marionette, merely being tugged along by the strings of her routine. Wonderful. Now she'd have to ask Bastien to pick the lock for her again. Chapter 36. By the time the bell of Gracehaven Church tolled the next morning, calling them all to worship, Ivy was sure she had never experienced a longer weekend in all her life. Crochet Club had been an utterly miserable affair. Without Marigold, the rhythmic blur of Grandma Evelyn's hook through her yarn and the murmur of Daphne's idle conversation had lacked its usual cheerful cadence, especially considering little Elodie's chair had sat empty as well. But of course, the child would have been absent. She and Mr. Vael had likely been packing their trunks, preparing to abandon the corner shop and return to the glittering capital, a place full of proper society and consequence, right alongside the Montclairs. Again, the memory of Friday night flashed through her mind, sharp and bright like a bolt of lightning. The cold drumming of the rain against her face and shoulders, the press of Mr. Vail's fingers against her wrist as he whispered, "Ivy." Her ridiculous heart leapt as ever. No, she chided it, blinking her way back to the present. Not now. Sitting in her usual pew, wedged between Bastien and Marigold, she tried her best to focus on Pastor Amos's words as the centaur read from Proverbs 3.
"Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight."
But her inability to concentrate when her mind was already scattered soon betrayed her. Movement shifted in her periphery, a flash of grey. At once her gaze drifted and snagged upon a pew across the aisle. The breath stalled in her lungs. Sitting alongside the Caldwells and the Halloways were none other than Mr. Vail and Elodie. Again, the two were a match set in their Sunday best, he in his slate grey coat and she in her grey silk frock. Pastor Amos's deep, resonant voice further carried over the hushed congregation.
"My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father, the son he delights in."
The notebook she had remembered to bring this Sunday rested in her lap, her ink perched haphazardly between her and Mari. Hastily dipping her quill, she jotted down some notes. But try as she might to keep her thoughts turned toward the Lord, toward the comfort his word could provide her now, her gaze soon hitched back upon Mr. Vail, studying his sharp features in profile. Gone was the pain that had etched itself there on Friday. She might have even convinced herself she had imagined it if the sight hadn't branded itself into her thoughts so completely. With a frown, Ivy scanned the surrounding sea of brunettes. Felix's auburn hair and Grandma Evelyn's snow-white curls provided the only deviations in hue. The entire pew was completely devoid of liquid silver. No Lord Montclair, no Lady Lysandra. Her brow furrowed as she chewed on that. Had the brother-sister pair returned to Veritas without the Vails? But if he had already told her goodbye, why was the Duke still here? After the service concluded, Ivy filtered out into the bright Sunday morning alongside her friends, accompanied by the gentle lilt of birdsong and the whisper of the wind through the branches of the ancient oak tree guarding the walkway. Though Marigold's smile looked a little less strained as their trio descended the steps together and moved off to the side of the path to wait for Daphne and Felix to emerge, still the warmth of the sun-phased natural light seemed diminished. "Marie?" Ivy whispered, drifting closer until she could finally thread her fingers with the other woman's. She imparted a gentle squeeze. Clutching her Bible to her chest with her left arm, Marigold returned the gesture with another fleeting smile. "I'm perfectly fine," Mari insisted under her breath, flicking a quick glance toward Bastian, who stood nearby, watching the entrance of the church. "I think I just need to lie down again, is all." Ivy nipped at her bottom lip. "If you're sure." At last, Daphne and Felix appeared hand in hand, trotting down the church steps.
Are we on for lunch today?
Felix called out, making a beeline for their small group. Bastian rubbed the back of his neck and flicked her and Marigold an uncertain look. Though Ivy hadn't told him a single thing about this business with Mr. Croft and Fern, still the blacksmith seemed to sense something was amiss.
How are we feeling today, ladies?
Under the weather, Ivy immediately answered on Marigold's behalf before her friend had to try to concoct some excuse for not hosting their usual Sunday lunch. "We'll have to skip this week, I'm afraid." Daphne offered a hesitant smile as she and Felix came to a pause beside them. "Why don't we host everyone at Ashdown today? It's only fair." Her gaze shifted toward Marigold. "Mari deserves a break from hosting." "You are too kind, Daphne," Marigold murmured, another weak smile twitching at the corners of her mouth. "But I fear I am still feeling quite unwell. I wouldn't want to spoil your afternoon. Though please do enjoy your lunch." And that was that. Marigold gently extracted her hand from Ivy's own and hurried away down the street, putting as much distance between herself and the rest of them as quickly as possible. Felix heaved out a sigh, exchanging a glance with her, Daphne, and Bastian.
Just us, then?
Ivy nodded, no longer knowing what to say as she stood rooted to the church lawn. A sinking sensation pooled in her stomach. What a wretched friend she was. Here Marigold was clearly drowning in the wake of Mr. Croft's sudden disappearance, in Fern's latest silence, and she had absolutely no idea what to do to pull her back to the surface. How had everything become so wrong so quickly? Breathing out a sigh, she fell in step with the others to wait for Mr. Phineas to bring the Halloway's carriage around and whisk them off to Ashdown. But as she walked, she sent up a quiet prayer. "Lord, please comfort dear Marigold. Fill her heart with your peace, and please, show me how to help her." Chest tightening, she added, "And please show me how to help me." Chapter 37. God's answer came swiftly, in the way of a gentle urging. It was past time for her to visit her parents again. After lunch, the cool earth of the forest welcomed the press of Ivy's bare feet. Her father's Bible clutched tightly to her chest, and her stomach full of savoury leek tart and freshly baked bread slathered with honey butter. She wandered deeper into the quiet sanctuary of the woods, leaving her lingering anxieties far behind. All around her, silver and gold motes of light drifted lazily beneath the canopy, sparkling in the afternoon air like suspended stardust. Beneath her toes, the grass surged into a vibrant, brilliant emerald, drinking in the subtle, unintentional hum of her half-dryad nature. Tiny white clovers uncurled their delicate petals, blooming in a fragrant trail in the wake of her footsteps. And with every step she took, she breathed a little easier. The tension that had been knotting her shoulders since Mr. Vael and Elodie first arrived in Gracehaven and purchased the corner shop slowly unravelled. This was clearly what she had been missing these past weeks. Time just to herself, with nothing but her Bible and the Holy Spirit for company. Time in which she could turn her thoughts completely toward the Lord. The gentle babble of the stream served as her guide, leading her past the patches of sorrel and violets she had harvested beneath Mr. Vail's watchful eye. Past the sun-drenched clearings, where the pixies made their homes amongst sprawling fields of wildflowers and sweet honeysuckle. The heady scent of nectar and pine swept her back to her teenage years, when she used to make this journey once a week with her parents. And then Grandma Evelyn, Daphne, Felix, and Marigold after. A faint smile hitched at the corner of her mouth. What bittersweet memories. After her half-mile hike, the trees parted to reveal the secluded waterfall nestled in the very heart of the woods. The musical, rushing roar of the water filled the clearing as it cascaded over the rocks, flashing like silver in the dappled sunlight before plunging into the pond that fed the forest stream. A cool, damp mist drifted off the surface of the water, clinging to the lush ferns guarding the little hideaway, where she and her parents had always picnicked on Saturday afternoons and taken turns choosing a Bible verse to memorize for the week. A tradition Grandma Evelyn had insisted on keeping, even after their passing. Resting right upon the water's edge stood a glorious weeping willow, its sprawling canopy of long leafy branches draping all the way to the ground like a lush living curtain. The hot threat of tears immediately flooded her vision, blurring the sight of the 2 stone markers tucked perfectly within the tree's dense protective shade. Creeping moss softened the edges of the carved stone, but the names etched into the granite remained perfectly legible. Mateo Flores and Willow Fairwood Flores. Her throat tight, she pushed aside the curtain of willow branches and stepped into the cool, green-tinted shadow of the tree. She knew her mother's soul had long since departed Luminara to be with the Lord. She knew, with every rational fibre of her being, that this tree was now simply a tree. And yet, as she sank to her knees and bowed her head, letting her forehead rest against the rough bark of the trunk, a familiar greeting tumbled from her lips anyway. "Hello, Mama," she whispered, her voice cracking, her hold on her Bible tightening. The dam finally broke. The tears she had refused to let properly spill at Daphne's party, that she had refused to cry for Fern, for herself, for any reason at all, poured down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I haven't been by to visit in a while. I've just been so lost." For a time, she knelt like that, her shoulders trembling as she wept against the silent, steady strength of the wood. Eyes closed, she imagined her mother reaching out and wrapping her up in one of her warm, forest-scented embraces one last time. For too long she had been entirely, hopelessly lost, her mind spinning in endless circles, her heart tethered to things that shifted like sand beneath her feet. Why? As if determined to mock her, the very words she had written to Fern in one of her letters bubbled to the forefront of her thoughts. God should always be foremost in our hearts, our souls, our minds. But when life becomes heavy with worries and doubts, why is it always our relationship with Him that is first to fall to the wayside? A humorless laugh burst from her aching throat, emerging more as another strangled sob rather than any proper sound of mirth. Hypocrite. That was what she was, and not only to Fern, but also to Mr. Vael for judging him for keeping his true identity a secret when she had been doing the very same for half her life. For too long, she had been fixated on all the wrong things. On Fern, on Mr. Vael, on her own wounded pride over losing the dream of purchasing the corner shop for her apothecary. And when her life had become heavy, with worry and doubt, what had she done? She had let her relationship with him fall to the wayside. She had stopped her daily Bible reading. She had just scrambled harder, trying to fix everything that was going wrong in her life, instead of turning to him and letting him lead. But worst of all, she had only prayed to him as a last resort, only when she desperately needed something. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18. That had always been one of her mother's favourite memory verses. Give thanks in all circumstances. When was the last time she had just stopped and given him thanks? She couldn't recall. A wave of shame washed over her as she slowly blinked her eyes open, tears still beaded heavily upon her eyelashes. Within that nearness, she stared at the rough bark of her mother's tree, tracing the deep, weathered grooves of the wood with her eyes, just as she had traced the lines with her fingers as a child, seeking comfort. Another verse drifted quietly through her mind. One of her father's favourites, 2 Corinthians 12:9. But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. His grace. She was saved by His grace alone. Not her inability to always keep her priorities in flawless order, or to bravely face every storm without a single doubt. Just His unfailing, unconditional love that met her exactly where she was. Flaws, failures, wandering heart and all. Her Heavenly Father loved her no matter how far she strayed from His path, or how hopelessly fixated she became on the things of this world. He simply wanted her to return home. A line from one of Fern's letters flashed through her mind unbidden. But to wake up and decide to serve the Lord is a decision we must make each and every day, is it not? A long, shuddering sigh broke past her lips, carrying her shame and guilt away with it. Fern was right. It was a choice. Not a choice to be made once, but a choice to be made daily. The strength holding her upright bled away. She slumped downward, sliding her spine against the trunk of the willow until she settled into a proper sitting position upon the mossy earth. Bracing her back firmly against the sturdy wood, she bowed her head, the curtain of her emerald hair falling forward as she carefully settled her father's Bible into her lap. "I'm sorry," she prayed, opening that holy book with a quiet reverence. "I'm sorry I spent so long away. I'm sorry I haven't always trusted you to lead. But I'm here now." The thin, familiar pages rustled beneath her fingertips as she turned to the New Testament, flipping past the Gospels until she finally reached Romans. The afternoon sun filtered through the swaying branches of her mother's tree, casting dappled light across the page as Ivy sat in the quiet and let the ancient living words of Romans 15 etch themselves back onto her heart. "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." She read the verse once, and then a second time, letting its promise settle deep. The rush of the nearby waterfall softened into a distant hum. A profound, quiet stillness seeped into her bones, chasing away the vestiges of all her recent anxieties. Joy and peace as you trust in Him. The divine truth of the words wrapped around her like a warm, familiar blanket. Her complete lack of peace over these past weeks had not been a punishment. It had been a symptom. There was nothing inherently wicked about desiring love, or a livelihood, or a place to belong. But she had allowed those earthly desires to usurp the throne of her heart. She had placed her absolute hope in the hands of unpredictable men and fragile circumstances, starving her spirit in the process. She had been looking to Gracehaven, to Fern, and to the dream of the corner shop to anchor her in this world, entirely neglecting the only steadfast anchor she truly possessed. She had taken her eyes off Him, and that was when all her troubles had begun. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. "Thank you," she whispered, praying aloud. "Thank you for all that you do, for all that you've done, for all that you might still do in my life." A radiant warmth bloomed deep within her chest. A tremulous smile broke across her face, lifting the corners of her mouth even as the tear tracks dried upon her cheeks. It was a peace that entirely surpassed understanding, a joy that had absolutely nothing to do with her circumstances and everything to do with the Creator who held her in His hands. "Thank you for the good days and the bad days," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet, convicted strength. "Thank you for my time in this world. Thank you for the opportunity to serve you." The rest of the prayer snagged in her throat. Serve. A blinding spark of clarity pierced straight through the lingering fog in her mind, snapping the fractured pieces of her purpose into perfect, brilliant alignment. She knew exactly what she needed to do now. How had she not seen it before? She didn't need a well-appointed apothecary in the very heart of Gracehaven to serve her community. She didn't need the perfect fairy tale romance to have worth. She just needed to truly and fully trust in Him.